Good afternoon, and welcome to this session. My name is Amit Fulay. I'm the product manager for Google Hangouts, and I'm going to be joined here today by Pamela Fox from Coursera. We have a great session for you today because I'm really excited to talk about two areas that have seen an amazing amount of innovation happen in the last few years: online education and social, specifically Google+. This is what you can expect in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the profound change that we're witnessing. Then I'll jump into some of the Google+ features that can help, and we'll look at a couple of case studies of actual implementation of some of these ideas. So let me start by reflecting a little bit on the change that we've all seen. We've gone from an era of traditional classrooms to connected classrooms. From a time when all of us carried huge amounts of textbooks in our backpacks to a time when we carry small number of devices in our pockets. We can now learn at our own pace and only advance once we are sure of having mastered a concept. And we can pretty much do that from anywhere. This change has been revolutionary. It has brought the costs of education down, and not just for a lucky and privileged few, but for everyone, without ever compromising on the quality of content. But the change has not all been easy. There are challenges with online education. And if you were to talk to some of the students who've taken these courses, who try to study these concepts, these are the common refrains you're going to hear from them. They will say, this is hard. A lot of times, this is a very lonely experience. And honestly, it's incredibly boring at times. Now, if you were to look at the data, that's the picture you would see. This is a typical dropout funnel for an online course. At the top, you have the number of students entering and enrolling. And as you progress through these tasks, as you go on with the course, only a small number, staggeringly only 5% of the students who enroll actually end up completing the course. Right? That's a huge problem. Because it turns out learning still requires certain basic elements that we were used to in the physical classroom experience. It requires help and direct connection with your tutor. You need help. You need to go up to a teacher, ask about your hard questions, about your problems. You still need hands-on experience. And collaborating and studying in a peer group is always much better, both for your learning and for the fun aspect, than doing it all alone. So as you heard in the keynotes today, we at Google are very passionate about online education, about learning in general. And so some of us on the Google+ product team and the engineering team, we really started thinking about these problems hard and said, what are the tools that we can build that can help people who are actually innovating in the education space? And social learning is the term that's kind of talked about a lot, but the whole idea is simple. While we've seen the benefits of online education, whether it's bringing down the cost, providing access to people who would have never dreamt of getting education from Stanford and MIT if they were not in this country, we've brought that access. That's been all positive change. But there are certain social aspects that are critical. The engagement that we had in the class, in the peer group, out of the class, that was very critical to the whole learning experience. So how do you do that? How do you mimic that positive aspects of a classroom experience and bring it to the online education? So first, let me talk about a few features that we have in Google+ that can help. I'm not saying they solve it all 100%, but that can help provide that virtual classroom feel when you're doing an online course. So the first one is Hangouts. And we had a big launch today It's the communications product that we have. You can message, you can do multi-way video chat with up to 10 people. Now imagine a study group, which has students from Asia, Africa, all studying the same course online, from the United States. How do you interact face-to-face? This is one tool that can really help. And we'll see in the second part of the session some of the experiments that we did and kind of the learnings we had from that. The other product that we have is what we call as Hangouts on Air. This is our broadcast product. You can have a conversation with up to 10 people, but you can stream it live over YouTube using this product. It's the same setup. It's easy to use. You don't need a studio environment. You don't need any production work that you need to do in order to create one of these broadcasts. Now, this product, turns out, is really helpful if a teacher wants to interact with certain students and others want to tune in. So you can imagine during office hours, where a professor sets a time, takes questions from the students, they all come in, but there's a lot more students who can watch that live or watch that recording archived, because through this product, we actually put it back on YouTube. We archive those clips on YouTube that you can go back and see. Sign in, Google Plus Sign In, actually gives you a single unified identity that you can carry across all of these things, whether you have an app, whether you are using Drive, whether you're doing Hangouts, all of that is just enabled by the single sign-on. And there's another feature that we have in Google Plus called Communities. We launched this a few months ago, which enables people based on certain common interests to come together. These are not people who are your friends or you know necessarily in your real life, but you share a common thread with which you can interact in this groups kind of environment. And again, we'll see examples how this has proved to be really popular with students as well. So instead of talking a lot more about these features, what I'm going to do is show you an example. And this example is from MIT Media Lab. They have a course around creative learning, which traditionally was never held online, which they collaborated with Lifelong Kindergarten and they put it online. And here's what the professors did. They first created a lightweight sign-up. You just put in your email address and you sign up for the course. None of the registration deadlines, submitting forms, none of that stuff, so it's really easy. Then they created a Google Plus community for these students. And almost 10,000 of these students who enrolled for the course actually became members of this community. And it became a rich forum for them to feel like they're part of a class. So they would post things, interact, ask questions, all of that stuff through this community. And the third thing that the professor did was actually start streaming all these seminars at Hangouts on Air. So anybody can tune in. If they miss a particular seminar, they can go back to YouTube and watch it. And again, it plays well with the whole self-paced learning model. You only proceed once you master the concept. So you can pause, rewind, do it at your own pace, pretty much from anywhere. The second interesting thing that happened when these professors did this was how students reacted to that. And turns out, students, if you give tools in the hands of students that are going to help them create classroom experiences, they're going to really run with it. So students in this particular class created more than 450 Google Plus communities. Think of this as study groups that we were all accustomed to when we went to school. Here's a map showing the class enrollment across the world. And the reason I put it up here is it's very important. All of online education is pretty much geographic by nature. You have students enrolling from different parts of the world. This is what your typical class would look like. And that's where the challenge and the tools come in play when you want to create a more cohesive community and provide the classroom feel. What else did the students do? When you give them tools, they'll do creative things. So here's how was the attempt of all these students to get to know each other. They created these intro videos, they put it on YouTube, and they kind of shared with each other. So now you can imagine you're taking a class by MIT, you don't live in the US, your students who are actually enrolled with you are from different parts of the world, you've never met them, but you have some tools in in your hands to be able to mimic that experience. Here's what the MIT professors in a media lab told us about their experience with these tools. These are quotes from them. I'm not going to read them. As you can see, these are the tools that were help them actually make the transition, bridge the gap between online and the offline learning experience. We've worked with a number of partners who've been using Google Plus features in some form or the other, integrating some of these things that we've done. But I specifically want to call Pamela from Coursera to come and talk about her experience. And the reason we kind of chose Coursera to try out a bunch of things is they share a common passion with us in making improvements, but also the philosophy around let's tweak, let's iterate, let's learn, and let's get to a place where our tools can actually add a lot of value to the users. So Pamela's going to talk about what experiments they did with us, what their learnings were. Take it away.
Cool. Hi, everyone. How are you? Yay. All right, cool. So I'm a product engineer at Coursera. I work on the student-facing features, which is perhaps what you would experience if any of you have actually used it. Can you raise your hands if you have? Wow, all right. I have never had that many people raise their hands. I guess we're kind of mainstream now. Only in San Francisco. Everywhere else, no one's heard of it. For people in other parts of the world, Coursera is massively open online courses offered by universities and partners. We actually have courses from the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which I think is awesome for any of you guys who have actually gone there and wandered around. So we have a huge range of courses. My mom just finished heterogeneous parallel programming and got 110%. And we also had a bunch of people just finish canine therogenology, which is, I think, dog reproduction. But I haven't taken the class, so I'm not an expert. But the point is that we've got courses across a bunch of different genres and a lot of different sorts of students taking them for lots of sorts of different reasons, right? And there's usually about 50 going on at any time because our courses do actually run on a schedule. And we do that on purpose because actually of social learning, right? So if there are people taking a course at the same time as you, you're more likely to actually be able to form a cohort and feel like there's other people doing it, right? So when I tweet out that I'm working on my homework for a class, I'll just get people randomly tweet back that they are too. And I was like, oh, right, I forgot. There's actually people doing it with me. This is cool. However, we've got tons of classes, and in any given class, we've got between 30,000 and even up to like 160,000 students enrolled, and they're from all over the world. But when you get into the class, this is what it looks like. It looks like a class. It looks like it's got lectures, it's got assignments, it's got a lot of text, and you look at it and you don't see people, right? You just see stuff you have to do. Which is cool because the classes can be quite interesting, but we need a people aspect to everything we do, right? So we've been trying to figure out how can we actually help students feel connection to other people inside this learning experience, right? And we can think of this in a few different axes, right? So what are the different forms of communications that we have? So we have synchronous communication where we can talk back and forth very quickly, and that's good for having very excited, energetic discussions. We've got asynchronous communications where we can post in a forum thread, and then a few hours later somebody else posts back, and we can take our time to come up with responses, also known as email. These are both valuable forms of communication, and they both have their uses. I used to work on Google Wave in Australia, and it did an awesome job at having both asynchronous and synchronous communication, despite everything else we can say about it. But so the point is that we need both of those forms, right? And we also have the difference between in-person, face-to-face communications and online, potentially faceless communications, right? And we love these in-person, face-to-face communications because it's like, wow, I can actually see you, and I know there's people watching me, which feels a lot better than giving a talk to no one. Trust me. So you feel much more intimate when you can actually see something. You have this whole different level of intimacy with them, right? But then you can have this other approach where you're online, and maybe you're even being anonymous. And there's actually good reasons for having that as well. Maybe you are in a controversial class. We have classes on AIDS and reproduction, contraception, all sorts of things that people don't always necessarily want to be forthright with their person, because there's weird people in the world that might do stuff to you. Okay. So we want both of these axes in terms of communication, right? So what do we have there? We've got our forums and wikis. Some people form online chat rooms. They use stuff like Study Room. We encourage people to go to meetup.com and actually create meetups and meet up in person. That, of course, doesn't scale that well because there's not going to be somebody in every single part of the world, not yet. So where does Google Hangouts fit in? It's synchronous communication, right? We can talk back and forth over the video. And it's also kind of in between being online and in person. It's almost like it's in person, right? So me and Amit, we actually never met until an hour ago. But it was okay, because I have a Hangout with him every week, and I feel like I know him, because the Hangout software doesn't have that skin softening thing yet or anything, so I'm like really familiar with his wrinkles and stuff. So it's cool. So it's so close to being in person that I've actually lost track of who I know in person and who I've just seen in a Hangout. So it's this really interesting part of the axes here. So we're interested in using Google Hangouts to help our students connect in a few different ways. So first, we want to help students connect to teachers. So unfortunately, we have a massive student-teacher ratio, right? In a typical class, like when I teach classes on the weekends, we usually try to have 1 to 10 ratios. That's a good ratio. Online, we've got ratios like 1 to 25,000, right? Which is kind of huge and ridiculous. How can students feel connected to a teacher when they're just, one of thousands and thousands of students? So one of the things that teachers do is they hold these Google Hangouts on air. So a specific example here, this is from the irrational behavior class. And that class had this peer assessment, and people weren't particularly happy with the way that they got graded by their peers, and they had a lot of questions about how the system worked and about the rubric, and there was just a lot of angst going on in the forums. And so the professor, he did respond in the forums, and he did post some announcements, but he just wanted to make sure that students were actually feeling like he was listening to them. So he put together a Google Hangout, and we also had a Coursera guy in there as well. He invited 10 of the vocal students from the forums in there, and he invited everybody else to watch this Hangout. And invited everyone to submit questions via Google spreadsheet. So this really helped students feel like Dan was actually listening to their questions. So just like Larry Page finished the keynote by just saying, hey, if you have a question, come ask me. That kind of helped us feel more connected to Larry, right? Like, oh, wow, Larry is just going to, just respond to us, just live like that. So the same thing here. It helps students feel like the professors actually care, and like they potentially could have a connection too, right? If you see another student connecting, you're like, oh, wow, okay, they're just like me. I guess we're all on this same level. And so we have lots and lots of professors that do these Google Hangouts and solicit questions beforehand and stuff like that. And generally, everyone loves this format. So that's cool, but there's a harder problem, and that's how do we help students connect to other students? And the reason this is hard is because we got thousands and thousands of students, right? And I actually wrote JavaScript to try and generate as many dots as I could to get on this slide, but that's only 25,000, I'm sorry. So we want to help students connect to each other, but the problem is that they obviously can't connect to every single other person. So how do we get them into groups, or how do we decide which clumps of them are actually going to connect, right? Because for something like a Hangout, the ideal number is somewhere between 5 to 12. You don't want to have 25,000 people on a Hangout. That would be a really, really interesting experiment that we could try maybe later today, but not for this. So let's go over a few things that we tried. So our first experiment was in the Think Again class, which is a class on reasoning and arguing. So it kind of made sense that, hey, these people might be interested in having some discussions. They are an entire class about discussing. So what we did is that we created these Hangout rooms, and we had 3 rooms that were persistent, so they were always there, which was meet someone new. And we tried to encourage people not to use pickup lines in that one, but I mean, if 2 people are going to meet in Coursera, I think that's also cool too. So let me know if that happens to you. I think that's why my mom is taking the parallel programming class, honestly. We have talk about the class, and then we have discuss elections. Those are our general rules. And then the professor would actually come up with discussion questions relevant to each week, and we would create 5 new rooms each week about that. So at any point, the students could go into these Hangout rooms, and whoever was there, they could chat with, right? So that was interesting. And In terms of code, it was pretty easy. We just used some JavaScript, and we stuck a few divs on the page and had the JavaScript populate those divs. And the Hangouts team, helped make these widgets for us to try this out. Now, for our second experiment, we did this in the irrational behavior class. And I was excited about this because I did take this class. I finished it last night at 2 a.m., the first class I've ever finished. So that was really exciting for me to use my own product. So we had 140,000 students enrolled in this. And here what we did is we did scheduled Hangouts, right? So the first experiment was like, OK, what happens if we just have rooms that you can just enter all the time? And we saw problems there with the timing in terms of people entering at the wrong times and being out of sync. So we did these scheduled Hangouts. And here you could actually see a list of upcoming Hangouts, and the TAs would come up with lots of cool ideas for interesting Hangouts. And you could say, I want to attend. You would get a thingy on your calendar. You would get a reminder from your calendar, and you go and enter the Hangout and chat with everybody there, right? So that definitely helped a lot in terms of getting people all there at the same time. So the class is officially over as of last night, and there were 65 Hangouts over 6 weeks, and every user saw an average of 5 other users doing those Hangouts. Pretty cool. In terms of the code, once again, really simple JavaScript. I'm kind of embarrassed about the code here because it was so easy, and I was like, thank you, Google, for making it this easy so I can go on to other things. And we also experimented with letting students schedule Hangouts, and we would actually prompt them in the forums to say, maybe you'd like to start a Hangout on this topic, and that would just link to this page that would tell them how to start a Hangout, right? So we didn't actually see as many students doing this, very few. And we're not sure exactly why that is, and maybe they're intimidating, they don't feel like they have the authority on it. They seem to much prefer joining the Hangouts that were started by the TA. So here's what we learned. So students really, really liked being able to visualize their classmates, right? The fact that they could actually see other people in the class was like, oh, wow, I'm really in a class, right? So in San Francisco, I have the fortunate ability to just walk around and find people that are using Coursera, which is really cool. But if you're walking around, Chile, Argentina, you may not just randomly find Courserians on the street. So being able to actually see that there's other people doing along with you was really, really powerful, right? Even for the people who didn't even have good conversations, they're like, it didn't matter. It was just cool that I could see people. There were people. I guess we're all just like really lonely on the internet now. And they also really like diverse opinions, right? Both in our forums and in our Hangouts, we hear this a lot, that students really, really appreciate getting thrown into these situations where they're kind of forced to hear other people's opinions, right? Because they just happen to be in a class with these other people, and they can't help but hear from people from all over the world, right? So the Hangouts helps with that quite a bit as well, because you actually get to have real discussions with people from all over the world and learn quite a bit about how things work everywhere. So that's what they loved. But we also learned a lot about what made for good Hangouts and what would improve the experience. So, I mean, this is, what good conversations need. I could not be talking about Hangouts, and all of these things would still be true, right? So you need etiquette. You need some sort of rules that you're following to have good conversations. Now, you might think it's obvious, but remember, we have people from all over the world, so the etiquette that we may have for our conversations may be different from the etiquette that they have for conversations in other countries. So we would actually have people write these wiki pages and forum posts with suggestions of etiquette, and people would banter back and forth about what the correct etiquette was, and that's where the discussion came up about, is it appropriate to pick up people in Hangouts? And because in some countries, maybe it is, right? So etiquette is actually increasingly important when you're doing something online in a massive setting. Shared language seems obvious, but if you get on the Hangout, you don't speak the same language as the other person, it's going to be a little hard to communicate. So that, it just makes everything harder. Focus, right? So this is why we tried to have Hangouts that were around particular topics. When we just had really general Hangouts, like the discuss the lecture, people didn't necessarily know what to talk about. When the Hangouts were like, hey, design your own irrationality experiment following this rubric here and talk about what you're going to test, right? It's very, it's a very focused topic, and people come in there and they know that they're there for a reason, right? Flow, right? So flow is something that's difficult to have in conversations, right? I'm sure we've all been in awkward conversations, where it's like it's going really great, really great, really great, and then suddenly it's like, you're like, oh, this is awkward. So that can be even worse. online, because you can't like kind of wander away and join and regroup and join other groups. You're kind of just sitting there staring at each other going like, okay, all right, we got to get this flow back, right? And it's just something that happens with human conversations. It's not always got that perfect flow, right? So people found it helped when there'd be somebody there who was like really good at guiding a conversation, and that's sort of a certain personality type, the people that are really good at realizing that a conversation is about to dip and kind of bringing it back up, maybe bringing it back into focus on something, and that would make for much more successful conversations. Now, of course, timing, I was saying, when we just did the rooms that you could just enter at any time, we found that, people would just enter at any time, and it would just always be off, right? So you want to try and get people starting that hangout at roughly the same time so that they're not sitting around and waiting. I mean, any of you guys who have had a video conference probably know what I mean about timing, right? You really want to get that timing really well. And finally, comfort, right? Some people may not feel comfortable suddenly being on video alongside 5 other people, video faces that they've never seen before, right? So how can we make people feel more comfortable? Maybe having the TA there helps, or maybe having them meet those people in the forums before, maybe that helps. So that's something we found as well, is that the comfort level was not always there. But those are just some experiments that we've done over the last few months, and we want to do a lot more experiments, right? That's kind of what we do. We just keep doing experiments to see what works and learn and try and do the next experiment. Because every time we do an experiment, we think we're going to have a result, and we're like, oh, I see. We got something we didn't expect, right? Because here's the thing about humans. They just do the damnedest things, right? Especially in groups. Actually, just anytime. So we've got a few ideas in mind for what we want to do in the future. So one thing that would be great is to actually time hangouts around watching lectures. So if you're watching the lecture, say, hey, there's also 5 other people watching this lecture. Maybe you want to discuss it afterwards, right? And there you've both got the timing and you've got the context, right? You've got something to discuss and you've got people to discuss it with. And luckily, I think in a lot of our classes, we do have enough people watching the lectures at the same time that we might be able to do that. Another thing we do is having hangouts more specifically around discussions, right? And say, hey, there are 5 people that are actually on this thread watching it right now. Maybe you'd like to just jump into a real-time hangout and just chat it out there, right? Especially for these threads that just get really long, right? It'd be much better just to do that, face-to-face. And finally, I really want to improve the comfort level people have by actually creating groups inside our classes. So we don't really have groups right now. People can create groups on social networks if they want to, but we really want to start creating groups for our students, like say, hey, we found 10 people in San Francisco that seem to be on the same commitment level of you. Maybe you'd like to form a group. Here's some forum threads, here's some hangout tools, go at it, do something, right? Because when you're in a group with people and you're kind of in a persistent group, then you're going to, all these things are going to be better, right? Because you're going to start to feel comfortable with each other. You'll start to have a shared etiquette. When you decide to have a hangout together, you'll all actually show up because you have a social pressure to actually feel like you're supposed to be there. So all of that can actually improve everything that we've talked about. Now, the Google Hangouts team didn't tell me that they're also adding chat to it, so I just added this slide in. So, because the interesting thing is now, Google Hangouts actually will encompass from synchronous to asynchronous because we've got this chat tied into it too, right? And I think that will be really interesting to experiment with and see, hey, what happens if we give students rooms where they can start off in a chat mode and then go into a video mode once they feel comfortable, right? Because I think that could help up with ramping up our comfort level and helping people find a topic, right? You start off chatting, you realize there's actually something that you do want to chat about with the other people in the chat room, and then you go into that hangout because you've decided on that, right? So I'm excited to experiment with that once the team gives me access to it. Yeah, so generally what I learned at Coursera and what I keep learning is that it's really important to experiment and try and come up with lightweight experiments, right? So you see, I wrote as little code as I could in order to come up with these experiments and track everything, A/B things. You'll learn from students and you'll learn that communities interact in very, very interesting ways, and it's a pretty cool thing to do.
Thanks, Pamela. Is this on? So I think we're right on time. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I do want to emphasize the last point that Pamela referred to, which is this is broadly applicable to all the online communities that you have. So while we talked a lot about online education and learning and students and professors, I think if you have a community of developers, sites where you have people discussing health issues, sports fans, whatever community it is that is geographically distributed, is tied together by a shared interest, I think we have features like Google Plus communities and Hangouts that can help you bridge that gap. So we would definitely love more of you to participate in kind of experimenting these things with us. And there's a short link here where you can submit a form if you're willing to kind of work on some of these things. If you have ideas, get in touch with us. We have a team that kind of does partnerships. They'll be monitoring this. We would love to work with you. With that, I want to leave a few minutes here for questions. So if you can use the mics, that will be great.
Hi, my name is Jan. I liked your early presentation with a lot of photos of smiling kids. However, a lot of them seem to be under 13. Can you comment on under 13, what's Google Plus doing, Hangouts, availability in K-12?
There's nothing I can add beyond what the established policies are, which is you need to be 13 or over for signing up for Google Plus. So I don't think we're changing any of that right now.
The information on the lessons learned, did that come from surveys distributed after the course, or was there a Hangout extension that you used to collect, to measure people's responses to the questions asked? How did you gather the data that you used to say these are people's responses?
So if I get your question correctly, how did we get the data on how the Hangouts were? Is that?
And how people were using the system, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it.
Yeah. So we did a combination of, as we do in all the products that we do at Google, a combination of like quantitative, looking at metrics, as well as qualitative studies. So we actually had a form that we asked students to fill every time they did a Hangout on the Coursera site. So we got some amount of data from that. We looked at our metrics, kind of how many students would initiate a Hangout, how long they stayed, how big the sessions were, what were the number of students in every given Hangout, and was there a correlation between number of participants and the length of the Hangout. We also talked to the professors, we talked to the TAs, and kind of got data from them around what their experience was, what could be better. So we use multiple channels here to collect feedback. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm part of a group of Australian teachers that use Hangouts to talk about cool stuff every week, and we really want some way of having a back channel. So there's 10 of us in the Hangout, and we're discussing things between us. Only one of us is talking at the time, but then there are lots of other teachers who are using Hangout on Air who want to ask questions as well. At the moment, they're sort of half on Twitter. You mentioned there's a Google spreadsheet the professor used to ask questions. Is there any better way of doing this, or can I hope for one to come?
That's great feedback. We've actually heard that not just in education space from a lot of folks who've been using Hangouts on Air, whether it's in media or other celebrities doing Hangouts on Air. And one of the things they've asked for is how can we better interact with people who are watching our. And so we've got that feedback, and we'll definitely try and solve that.
Hello, so I'm with a startup that works on helping students take notes on videos on sites like Coursera. And it leverages Google Docs, and we're wondering what Google would be doing for such startups that try to build these on this ecosystem.
Absolutely. So we actually have a platform, an API set, that lets you, just like Google Docs is an app that you can run within a Hangout, or YouTube for that matter. We have a API that's available publicly. We launched it last year. So you can use that to write an app, a note-taking app, or whatever you want to do to enhance that learning experience. We actually do have a session later in the day at 4 p.m. on some of the changes we've done in the Hangouts platform, which I highly recommend you should attend.
Hi, I'm Christine from Scoot and Doodle, and we have been building on inside Google's Hangouts API, and I was hoping you can share with all of the other developers that are looking to hear more about what you're doing with the Google Hangouts API.
We have a lot more to share. I actually just did a post with all the changes we've made. We're moving to a new, faster development model, and there's a lot of new functionality that we've added. Again, there's a session by Richard Dunn, who's a technical lead on the platform, who's later in the day at 4 o'clock today. I think you should check that out. And thanks for your work. Scoot and Doodle, for those of you who don't know, was one of the early partners we had building on top of the Hangouts platform, and they have a great app. So great to see you, Christine.
Hi, I have a question for Ms. Fox. You had there a lot of feedbacks, and some of them were surprising, and I didn't have a chance to read it all. Could you share your really surprising insights and feedbacks on what was quite unexpected results of your experiments?
Well, I guess we will be sharing the slides later so that you can look over the actual quotes I had on there. I pulled them out of forums and out of surveys. I think the things that we were surprised at was the kind of ways that students wanted to participate in Hangouts. So we see a lot of students want to participate in Hangouts, but they don't necessarily want to be the ones that start one, right? So we kind of expected to see a lot more students want to start Hangouts. So I think what I've learned there is that I want to do more experiments where actually the professor kind of says, because we do have this one professor in psychology that he wants to end every week by saying, all right, this is what we talked about this week. Now go sign up for a slot and discuss this for 30 minutes. So he's actually going to direct his students. He wants to direct them to do it because it's exactly what he does at college. At college, he'll have a physical sign-up sheet around there, right? So there, you would feel more licensed to actually be signing up for it because somebody has told you this is something we want you to do, right? It's really intimidating to be the one that says, I'm going to start a conversation. That's hugely intimidating, right? When I'm at a party, I literally hide in the bathroom, right? Because it's scary. But if somebody goes and invites me into a conversation, say, hey, this is Pamela, she's part of the conversation. I'm like, all right, cool. I will totally participate, right? So it is very scary to be the initiator of anything. So if we can, license people and enable students to do that, I think that they'll end up having really good experiences that they want to have. I mean, I think it's like a lot of social experiences, right? If it was up to me, I would just spend all my time being a hermit and not going outside. But then when I do go outside, I actually quite enjoy myself, right? But somebody has to give me that license and has to enable me. So I want to enable more students to do that.
And just to add to that, I think that was one of the big surprises for me as well, which is, as engineers, we're just trained to think about how to solve certain things technically, like what are the features I can add, how can I do things that's easier. But there are some real social kind of issues, like if students are shy to speak up, if there's a language barrier, they feel awkward, they don't want to turn on the camera. And those are much tougher problems to solve. So I think that's both daunting as well as exciting because we need to figure out how to do that in an online world. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Belle from Cal Poly Pomona. I'm an instructional designer for university higher ed, and I really liked about the Google Plus community in part. But we are actually big in accessibility part. I know that you guys do a lot of the video, audio, those things. Can you guys talk about some kind of accessibility, like how to integrate with the closed captioning, if there's a video synchronous, asynchronous, or anywhere, like Hangouts, Air, and stuff?
So as you know, Google has Translate and a lot of the technologies. On YouTube, we have closed captioning. So some of these broadcasts, when they're archived, we can turn on the closed captioning. So that's one solution that exists. In terms of real conversations and how do we bridge that kind of language barrier, I think that's a much tougher problem, but there's a lot of people at Google who are looking at it. I mean, you saw some of the conversational search stuff that we're doing. You can imagine using some of that technology that we have and see how we can kind of bridge the language barrier. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But there's folks working on that problem.
I think with our videos, because we actually have an accessibility contract since we work at universities, we have to be accessible. So all of our videos must have English subtitles. So I think what happens for some of the Hangouts is that they get recorded on air, so they can download the video. So I think they upload them to our platform, which then kicks off a subtitling job with the subtitle service we use. So I think actually for a lot of the office hours that they do with Hangouts on Air, they actually, the professors do create subtitles for them. So you could still create subtitles using other services as well.
All right. Showing me 30 seconds left. If there are other questions, we've got a short amount of time. I can take one more. If not, thanks a lot for attending the session and coming to Google I/O.